Hello all, a very good afternoon. So I would actually like to take this as an immense pleasure and a great opportunity to welcome all of you for this third session of Prelims Masterclass 2025 of Environment and Ecology. So for all of you who are viewing this particular video for the first time, I would like to introduce myself as Sureka Bhaskar. So I, on behalf of Narayana IAS Academy, will be dealing with series of Environment and Ecology, the top 100 most important current affairs for the upcoming prelims examination. Okay, so after which we will also be discussing about certain current affairs from the geography section. Moving forward, we will actually discuss on the international relations as well, important international organizations, the schemes, reports and indices in news and so on. Okay, so we've already completed two classes where we've actually dealt with significant or very important topics like the ecosystems, and also we discussed few environmental organizations and bodies. And after discussing or after showing you what are all the topics that we've already completed, let us start with a fresh and the most important topic that is a very high impactful area, and it will definitely come in your prelims examination. Okay, so let us kickstart our discussion by looking at this particular slide on the topics that we have segregated on the number of current affairs that have appeared in the past 1 year from January 2024 till the month of March 2025. Okay, so we had actually started the series with the concept of ecosystem. Okay, so in ecosystem we've already dealt with the forest ecosystem, and under forest ecosystem we have actually dealt with a number of initiatives like the Peace Forest Initiative. We've also looked into the Rio Conventions, that is the UNCCD, the UNCBD, as well as UNFCCC. Okay, so apart from this, we've spoken about the UN Red Initiative and also about the other partnerships and conventions, okay, with respect to climate change. Okay, so this was with respect to the forest ecosystem. We also saw about the international arrangement of forest, the wood certification scheme and so on. Now moving on, we saw the other ecosystem. Sorry, before moving into the other ecosystem, we dealt with the ocean ecosystem where we spoke about the High Seas Treaty as well as the Blue Flag certification, the number of beaches that have actually acquired or have been awarded the Blue Flag certification. All that we've dealt with in this particular ocean ecosystem. Then we moved forward to discuss about the other ecosystems where we spoke about a number of ecosystems. Okay, so let me occupy this space. We spoke about the mountain ecosystem where the mountain partnership was actually discussed. Then we discussed about the peatlands and how peatlands actually play a very important role in climate regulation by storing the carbon for millions of years. And then we moved forward, we discussed about the Ramsar Convention on wetlands. So the wetland ecosystem was covered. Then we also discussed about the mangroves, how these blue ecosystems or the these kind of ecosystems actually help in climate regulation as well as in protecting the soil erosion, in protecting from the menace of tsunami, etc. So this is what we actually saw. And after discussing this, we went on to discuss the environmental organization and bodies, where definitely you will not forget, because we studied this World Wildlife Fund for Nature, where I told you an interesting story about this panda in the Zoo of London named Chi Chi, after which it was actually taken, or in the memory of whom the logo or the symbol of WWF was actually decided. And post this, we discussed about the Global Environmental Facility, how it actually provides funding to important conventions like the Minamata Convention on mercury, and then we had the Stockholm Convention on persistent organic pollutants. Then you had the UNFCCC on climate change, UNCBD on biological diversity conservation, and finally UNCCD, the legally binding agreement on desertification. So these were all the topics that we discussed. Moving on, we also looked at the national organizations which were in news. Of course, we saw the framework on climatic services that has been launched on the 150th anniversary of the IMD, that is the Indian Meteorological Department. Moving forward, we also discussed about the NGT, the jurisdiction, whether its ruling is binding on the government as well as the private sector, the appointment of the chairman, etc. It was discussed here. And finally, the Central Groundwater Board was also discussed because it released the annual report of 2024 on the number of contaminants and the associated contamination or the diseases that it actually causes. Okay, and this was very important because questions on groundwater pollution are becoming very frequent. Okay, so this is what. Now, we will move on to the most interesting and the most demanded topic in current affairs, that is climate change. Okay, because when the topic of climate change comes, we have the number of protocols that have actually been signed, and then India has actually adopted the INDC, that is the nationally determined contributions. Whether we have pledged to the Paris Agreement or not, what was India's role or takeaway from the recent COP29 of UNFCCC at Baku, all this we will actually be discussing over here. Okay, so let us quickly move forward. So there are a number of topics that I'll be taking up today, and I would just like to run you through the topics that we'll be discussing today. So first topic will be the marine carbon dioxide removal. Okay, so marine carbon dioxide removal, that is your MDR. This is nothing but enhancing the capacity. Is it visible? Can anybody answer me in the comment section if this one is visible or not? Just a minute, just give me a minute. Okay, not able to view the. Okay, let me take another color. Maybe black will do justice. Yes. So first we'll be dealing with the MDR. Yeah. So first we'll be discussing about MDR, that is nothing but the marine carbon dioxide removal, MCDR, okay, which is enhancing the capacity of the oceans in order to store or sequester the carbon dioxide without releasing into the atmosphere, further leading to the global warming and climate change. Okay, so first concept is MCDR. The second one will be on CBAM. This is nothing but the carbon border adjustment mechanism of the European Union. So we'll be discussing about the second topic, that is CBAM, where EU has actually come up with this particular adjustment mechanism, where the developing countries like India and China at COP29 have expressed their concerns, okay, because their exports will definitely take a major hit. So this is what it is. The next article is on the carbon credits, which is very important. So carbon markets and carbon credits, that become important topic. Okay, so what is this market mechanism and what is the concept of carbon credits and how it is very impactful in reducing the reductions, and what are all the countries that are taking a back seat because of this particular carbon markets and mechanisms, is what we'll be discussing here. And moving forward, we will talk about climate change adaptation. Okay, so climate adaptation, these are very important terms. You would have heard in a lot of reports of the United Nations, which definitely talks about the climate change. You would have heard about adaptation and mitigation. You would even find these authors writing in the newspapers in the editorial section. So what do you mean by adaptation and how it is different from that of mitigation strategies, and where India stands? What are all the examples of mitigation strategies, examples of adaptation strategies, and how it is useful in curbing the menace of climate change, is what we will be discussing. Then we'll be discussing about an interesting topic where the EU has come up with the nature restoration plan. So what is this nature restoration plan? So far we were discussing about the climate change, right? So along with climate change, how do you conserve your biodiversity and their associated ecosystem, is what we'll be discussing in this topic, that is EU nature restoration plan. Moving forward, we'll be talking about a concept of geoengineering, or it is also called as the climate engineering. Okay, so where you intentionally alter the way in which the the climatic systems actually function. Okay, so this is what is called as the climate engineering or geoengineering. What are the different techniques? One is by carbon storage method like afforestation, reforestation, then carbon capture, utilization and storage, etc. And the next one is by solar methods, that is where majorly you will be tweaking with the reflectivity or the albedo of the earth. So this is what we'll be discussing here. So this is geoengineering or climate engineering. Next important topic is CCUS, that is carbon capture, utilization and storage. That is nothing but whatever is the effluent that is released by the industry into the atmosphere, we actually take away the carbon and store it or utilize it for other purposes without releasing into the atmosphere. So this is what is called CCUS. There are different methods for utilization and storage. This can actually be used for making the fuels, etc. So all that we will see. Increase in the oil production can be done, how it is stored in the coal seams or the emptied or the drained reservoirs, all that we'll discuss here. Moving forward, the next topic, very important, the UNFCCC COP 29 that actually took place in Baku is what we will be discussing here. So this, when we start with this particular article, you need to pay attention because we will run through what is the meaning of UNFCCC, when did it come into existence, whether it is legally binding or not, what are all the protocols or the conventions in that, such as the Kyoto Protocol, the Paris Convention, etc. What are the objectives of this? Is it binding on the parties or the countries to abide by the emission targets set by the Kyoto Protocol or the Paris Convention with respect to that of the average global temperature of 1.5 degrees? All that we'll be discussing here. And what are the key takeaways that were discussed in the UNFCCC, like the new collective quantitative goal. Okay, so this we will be talking about what is this funding or the goal. Okay, where the countries were very disappointed, they actually expected a climate finance of $1 trillion, but then it was actually decided that around only $300 billion will be given. So here, that is why there was a delay in submission of the NDC, that is the what to say, determined national determined contribution policy, that is 2030, was delayed by India because it was not satisfied by this agreement. So this is what we will be discussing about. Okay, now moving forward, all the last two articles will be the global cooling pledge. Okay, this is with respect to the cooling systems, and cooling systems like your refrigerators, the air conditioners, etc. How much of what to say, emissions do they actually result in, and what is the importance on controlling the hydrochlorofluorocarbons, and what was this Montreal Protocol, whether it was actually amended by the Kigali Agreement, did India ratify it, and all those important details we'll be discussing in this particular article. And the final one is the COP 16 of the CCD, that is United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification. So here we'll be understanding the concept of what is desertification per se, and what are all the measures which are actually taken globally as well as nationally in order to take care of this particular desertification. Okay, so all this we will see here, and the takeaways by India. It is very important. Okay, and the associated terms also we'll talk about. Okay, so these are all the topics, and I had given you a fair idea on what we are going to discuss. So now let us quickly jump into our very first topic, that is just give me a moment to open the comment section. I'm not able to do so. So once we open that, we can actually start with our discussion. I think I would need some help here. Just a minute, just give me a minute. I will see if I'm able to open it on my laptop. Yeah, now I'm able to see the chat section. Let us actually resume with our class. Okay. So the first topic, I would need some help here. 1 minute here. Yes. Okay. So our first topic today is marine carbon dioxide removal. See, looking at the topic, don't think we are trying to remove carbon dioxide from the marine environment or the ecosystem. Okay. So what we are trying to do here is enhancing the capacity of the oceans to act as carbon sinks. What do you mean by carbon sinks? They can capture and store the carbon dioxide without emitting into the atmosphere. Only when there is atmospheric emission, what happens? There is increase in the temperature, right? So when there is increase in the temperature, that actually leads to global warming, then sea level rise and so on. Okay. So here the MCDR is seen as a potential solution in order to enhance the potential of the oceans to act as carbon sinks in order to mitigate climate change. Okay. Now let's move forward in understanding further. So what is marine carbon dioxide removal? It is nothing but often associated with a set of strategies, okay, where you enhance the capacity of the ocean to capture and store carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Okay, so this can actually be done by a number of natural processes also, or by a series of engineered processes also. What is the aim? In order to enhance carbon dioxide sequestration capacity, and the next one is to aid the global fight against climate change. See, basically whatever other topics we are discussing today, they actually are more relevant for what? Your mains examination and prelims examination, and everywhere it is about greenhouse gas emissions only. So you need to know that global climate change is mainly, or what to say, the driver or the catalyst is actually your greenhouse gas emissions. Okay, one of which is your carbon dioxide. So there we are trying to sequester, absorb and store this carbon dioxide. Okay, now moving forward, let us actually see. This is the example of what to say, the marine carbon dioxide removal. If you guys are not able to see, let me zoom it and let's discuss one by one. Okay, so if you see this diagram, the first one talks about terrestrial biomass dumping. So whatever is your agriculture residue, okay, so all your agriculture residue after they are actually harvested and which are left behind, they are taken and they are dumped underground beneath the ocean. Okay, so that they are not burnt, or when they are decomposing, they do not release any kind of methane, carbon dioxide, etc. So this is one method where you remove the carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and then store it beneath the ocean without being released. The next one is FENN and P fertilization. This is nothing but adding, what you say, the iron rich contents or the nitrate or phosphorus rich content into the water. When you add that, what happens? You are actually increasing the nutrient content of the water, thereby you are enhancing the growth of the phytoplanktons. And phytoplanktons, during the process of photosynthesis, they actually take in oxygen and they give out carbon dioxide. Okay, sorry, they taken, this is the respiration we do, I'm sorry. So phytoplanktons, during the process of photosynthesis, they take in carbon dioxide and they release oxygen. So since they take in carbon dioxide, when they die, what happens? They actually go and they get settled towards the bottom of the ocean floor, and there the decomposition and the storage of the carbon actually takes place. So this is this iron or nitrate and phosphorus fertilization. Next one, if you see, there is blue carbon enhancement. Okay, blue carbon enhancement is nothing but the carbon that is stored by the marine ecosystem, specifically the peatlands, or you actually have the mangroves, etc. Okay, so if you have mangroves or the seagrass, which are also called as kelps, which grow underneath the surface water, or these macro algae farms, what happens? They help in the storage or sequestering the blue carbon. Okay, next one is marine biomass for biochar. Biochar is nothing but it is like the burnt charcoal. Okay, so whatever is the biomass is over there, all that is again sent underground. Next one again, marine biomass. So marine biomass which are used for the production of bioenergy. From that bioenergy, the carbon alone is absorbed and they are sequestered below and they are stored in the what to say, empty reservoirs or the coal seams, etc. Now moving forward, we also have direct carbon dioxide removal from the seawater by the method of CCUS, that is carbon capture, utilization and storage. There is also process of artificial upwelling. Okay, so the water from beneath the ocean is actually taken to the top. These are actually nutrient rich. When it is taken to the top, what happens? It results in the formation of phytoplankton, again photosynthesis, so carbon storage. And finally we have artificial downwelling also. So the surface water which actually has most of absorbed carbon dioxide, that is also taken to the bottom in order to store it. Okay, so these are all the types of marine carbon dioxide removal. Okay, so now let's quickly move on to the next slide and see what are all certain biotic approaches, that is the nature based approaches, and abiotic approaches, okay, which are used for the marine carbon dioxide removal. First one, as I also told you, it is the mangrove restoration, or it's also called as the blue carbon ecosystem. Blue carbon captured by the ocean or the coastal ecosystems, and mangroves here capture carbon dioxide by the process of photosynthesis, and they store it in their biomass. The biomass is nothing but the trunk, the roots, the leaves, etc. And they actually store it in their waterlogged soils. In the waterlogged soils, there exists a situation that is called as the anoxic condition, okay, or the anaerobic, where there is less presence of oxygen, which actually enhances the capacity of the waterlogged soil to hold or to store the carbon dioxide for a very long time, number hundreds of years or a millennia also. If you see mangroves versus terrestrial forest, in terrestrial forest most carbon is actually stored above the ground, okay, but see, in terms of mangroves, you have most of the carbon which is stored below, because here is the water surface and there is lot of carbon sequestration which is happening over here. Okay, so this is what is one of the approach, that is the blue ecosystem or the blue carbon. Next one is the macroalgae or the seaweed cultivation. Macroalgae is nothing but the kelps. So these are the kelps, okay, the algae. These are actually the ones that grow below the surface of the water. And the harvested biomass, what they can do, they can be buried in deep sea environments in order to ensure that there is permanent storage of carbon dioxide. Okay, now moving forward, let us actually see other biotic approaches. One is the ocean iron fertilization. I told you, bringing in, that is, while iron is added to the ocean, it actually increases the growth of the phytoplankton, already enhanced uptake of carbon dioxide. We also told, when the phytoplankton die and sink, they decompose below the surface, okay, in deep waters. Next one, terrestrial biomass dumping. We saw any kind of organic matter like the agriculture residue, etc. These can also sequester carbon deep into the ocean. Next one, artificial upwelling, that is upwelling when you bring the nutrient rich water to the surface, that actually stimulates the growth of phytoplanktons. Again, this is actually absorption of carbon dioxide. So you can see phytoplanktons by the process of photosynthesis. Okay, I hope you actually know what is the process of photosynthesis, right? So this actually happens, and then what happens? The carbon dioxide is taken in and the oxygen is released, and photosynthesis, the process is C6H12O6 plus oxygen is given out, okay? So carbon dioxide plus water in the presence of sunlight. So this is your photosynthesis, okay? So this is glucose. Done. This is the process of photosynthesis. Now let's move forward and see what are all the abiotic approaches or the engineered solutions which are used to store the carbon dioxide under the ocean. The first one, ocean alkalinity enhancement. You have certain alkaline minerals such as you have the crushed limestone, or you actually have certain minerals like the olivine. If you what to say, mix it, or if you introduce in water, what happens? It actually makes the water very alkaline. It reduces the acidity. So when the water is alkaline, it enhances the capacity of it to absorb more carbon dioxide and store it. So that is what is the alkaline material. Next one is artificial downwelling. I told you, pumping the surface water which is very rich in carbon dioxide underneath. So that is called as artificial downwelling. And the next one is direct CO2 removal. I told you, right, whatever are the effluents or the emissions by the industry from all other gases, you need to take down, or you need to separate the carbon dioxide, and you will have to, or to say, capture, utilize it for other purposes like oil production, etc., and then you have to store it underground. Okay, so this is what is the CCUS method. So now we have actually finished our first topic. Now we are moving to the second one. Let us see if there is any comment which is actually here. You guys can shoot your doubts if you have, so that we can have a very interactive sessions if possible. Okay, fine. So now moving forward, the second article is EU's carbon border adjustment mechanism. So recently, you know, right, at Baku, there was the COP29, that is Conference of Parties 29, that actually took place. You know, Conference of Parties is the highest decision making body, and it is a part of UNFCCC. Even in UNCCD, if you see, COP is the highest decision making body over there. So it takes decisions and when they have to meet and all those things. Okay, and what are the conventions, what can be the targets that can be set, all that. So in 29th meeting of the UNFCCC that recently took place, there were developing countries like India and China. They expressed concerns about the EU's, that is European Union, carbon border adjustment mechanism, and they felt that it is going to be a trade barrier, and this is going to disproportionately affect the developing countries. Okay, for this we'll first understand what is CBAM. Many of you, if you are a beginner, do you know what is EU? EU, don't think it is a country or a continent. Okay, so European Union is nothing but it is a political and an economic union, and you have almost 27 countries which is part of EU as of 2025. Okay, so this actually includes countries like Cyprus, then you have what to say, the Czech Republic, okay, and then you have the Croatia, then we have Denmark, we have Belgium, okay, and then also other countries like Slovakia, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, okay, Spain, Portugal, Netherlands, etc. Okay, so these are all the group of countries and which are a union of political and the economic union. So that is what is called as EU. So EU jointly comes up with this particular carbon border adjustment mechanism. Now let us actually understand what is this concept of CBAM. Okay, so it is a policy. Of course, it's a policy. Policy under what? It is a policy under the European Green Deal. Okay, so very, very important. What is European Green Deal? European Green Deal is nothing but it is a policy initiative that was actually approved or signed in the year 2020 by the European Commission in order to make the European Union climate or carbon neutral by the year 2050. So this is what is the European Green Deal. Okay, so it is a policy under this European Green Deal in order to put a price, that is, if you are actually importing anything which is which has carbon embedded even in the production or the raw materials or whatever, so what happens is that the person who is importing it must actually pay the price of emission. This is what it is. Okay, so the price on carbon emissions which is embedded in your imports. For example, if EU, a particular company is, or a particular country is actually importing, let's say, iron and steel from India. Okay, and when I'll tell you the process, first of all, if this is India, which is exporting iron and steel into EU, and it enters the border of the European Union, what happens? Here, they actually have to abide by the CBAM. Who has to abide? The importer has to abide. Okay, so this importer must actually have the CBAM certificate, and in that he has to actually note down what is the amount of carbon emission which is involved in the production of this particular iron and steel. Okay, in case if India already pays a carbon tax back in its own country, okay, then they need not actually what to say, then that amount is subtracted from the total bill of the CBAM certificate. Okay, so this is how CBAM works, and this actually applies only to the EU importer from abroad. Do you understand? EU importer from abroad, whereas the EU supplier itself need not be subjected to CBAM, because that particular company or the country will already be paying tax under the emission trading mechanism. Okay, so we will further understand it in detail. So let me clear this all. So under the European Green Deal, there is a price on the carbon emission embedded in the imports, okay, to the EU. So EU is importing, remember that. The goal is to prevent carbon leakage. So what do you mean by carbon leakage? Definitely the EU industries actually want to leave the country, and they want to establish the iron and steel, the fertilizer, the cement industry somewhere outside in a country which actually have lesser restrictions or lesser compliance mechanism with that of the emission targets. Okay, so in order to protect that leakage, this CBAM has actually come into place. What is going to be the timeline of implementation is that from 2023 to 2025, it's a transitional phase. Okay, where there has to be a mandatory reporting of emissions by the importers then and again, not the exporter. The importer, the person in the EU who is importing something from another country, has to report it annually. The next one, on 2026 onwards, the full implementation requiring the purchase of CBEM certificates. Till now, CBM certificates need not be bought, but only you have to report the quantum of product that you have imported from the other country and what is the embedded carbon emission over there in the imports. Okay, next one, the applicability of CBAM is initially initially to the imports such as cement, iron and steel, aluminium, fertilizers, electricity, as well as hydrogen. So these are the you know the commodities on which the applicability of CBAM is on. Okay, now moving forward, how does it work? I told you, right? It is through issuance and purchase of the CBAM certificates by the importers of specific goods. For example, if EU wants to import iron and steel from India, what happens? They actually have to buy the CBAM certificates in order to declare how much of carbon emission is in that particular product. Okay, these certificates must be purchased in order to match the carbon footprint. What is carbon footprint? That is measured based on how much energy is used to produce that particular product, how much carbon intense that particular product is, okay, and what is the carbon content of the raw materials that are used, whether it is wood or what it is, okay. So all that is included. Then what is the price of the certificate? Who decides it? The price of the certificates is actually based on the weekly average auction price of the EU emission trading scheme. Okay, so EU emission trading scheme introduced in the year 2005. Okay, so this is what it is. So the price of the certificate, whether it is 10 rupees, for example, okay. So what is the euro? 10 euro, 50 euro, whatever it is decided based on the weekly average auction price of the EU emission trading scheme. So this is what it is. The next one, continuation of it. So first, importers, what they have to do? They have to declare the quantity of goods and the embodied emissions in these goods. Okay, by which date? By 31st May each year they actually have to declare that I have imported this much quantity of iron and steel into the European Union from so and so country. It has so much of embedded carbon in it. This is what it has to declare. The next one, along with the declaration, what do the importers have to surrender? They also have to surrender the corresponding number of CBAM certificates. Okay, so if if for example, if the top cap is only 1 ton of carbon dioxide, this one actually has to be emitted, but it is beyond that, then I will buy a CBAM certificate when I'm importing iron and steel or cement. Okay, then the second time again buy the CBAM certificate. So number of certificates that I've actually brought alongside the GHG emission embedded in the products have to be mentioned. In case if the exporting country already pays a corresponding tax, for example a carbon tax in any other country, then that can be subtracted from the final bill. So this is how CBAM works. Let us actually see clearly over here if you are confused. This is a non-EU supplier. Okay, this is where I tell this is India. So when the Indian cargo actually reaches the border, where there you will be stopped by the EU customs. Okay, so this is the EU border. You are stopped. They will check your products. If there is no amount of carbon that is involved, it is only sustainable and other things, they will allow you to go. Otherwise, what they will do, the importer, whoever is importing from you, will actually buy the CBAM certificate for import, and they will ask you, have you, okay, now you are actually giving me fertilizer. For this fertilizer, or for example concrete or cement, for this how much of carbon emission you have done? Have you paid a corresponding tax in your country? If they say yes, then that is subtracted from the bill, or if you say no, then what happened? A corresponding CBAM certificate value worth of that is actually taken. Okay, this is what it is. Now this CBAM authorization is actually important by the EU buyer. They have to annually they actually have to submit, okay, with the carbon footprint, etc. And it is not applicable to the EU supplier itself. It is only to a non-EU supplier. The EU supplier need not do it because they are already under the emission trading system. Okay, so CBAM is not applicable. So this is how this carbon border adjustment mechanism works. So what are the concerns for India is that EU actually happens to be one of the important trading partner, and around 14% of India's exports, including the steel and aluminium, go to the European Union. Okay, so given that India, all the most of the sectors are carbon intense only in India. So given that, CBAM will prove, or it will impose higher tariffs, making Indian exports uncompetitive. Okay, there will be higher tariffs because when they are importing your carbon intense, no, it is actually a problem for their importers only. No, so why would they do that? So in order to do that, they will impose higher tariffs also. Next one, the UNCTAD study actually says that India may lose around $1 to $1.7 billion annually in energy intensive exports. And also, India does not have a local or a national carbon tax. Okay, so there is no, or there is very light chances, or very less chances for India's production to align with what the CBAM standards. Also, there is unequal responsibility. What do you mean by unequal responsibility? See, historically the polluters have been the developed countries because of their industrialization, industrial revolution, etc. Okay, now the price is borne equally by the developed and the developing countries. Then what is the point of common but differentiated responsibility that the Paris Agreement, that the UNFCCC has actually come up with? So that is the question. Okay, the Paris Agreement, yes, I was right only. So INDC as well as common CBDR, common but differentiated responsibility, that is, you have to control the menace of pollution, you have to control the emission targets, but how much you will have to control, it depends upon your historical emission or historical contribution to the pollution. That is what it is. Developed countries have to contribute more, but they are not accepting it. That is why US has actually pulled out of the Paris Agreement recently, followed by that you have Argentina and other countries lining up to leave it. So all that, so the burden of which is actually falling on the developing countries like India. Next one, the global spillover. If CBAM comes in place, there will be other countries also which will be levying such a tariff or which will be which will whoever are in a bilateral trade relationship with India, when they come up with such a policy, it's going to be a huge setback for India's exports. Okay, so these are all the concerns for India. Now let's move to the third most important and a very nice topic. This is carbon markets. Okay, so what do you mean by carbon markets? Carbon markets are actually evolving globally because it is seen as one of the innovative tools for emission reduction. Carbon market is nothing but it is a mechanism. Okay, please pay attention. It is a mechanism where there is buying and selling of carbon credits. Now you will have a doubt, what do you mean by carbon credits? Let me say, for example, a regulator or the government is actually telling a particular business or a company that you should emit only 10 kg of carbon dioxide in your production. For example, let's take a biscuit company. Okay, they are saying for production of 1000 packet of biscuits, you will have to release only 10 kg, or let's even say 10 tons. No, let's take it 10 kg only. 10 kg of carbon dioxide. Okay, so they are saying your biscuit company for production of 1000 packets have to produce only 10 kg of carbon dioxide. So if you abide by that, and if you produce or if you emit only 8 kg of carbon dioxide, then what happens? You are given an award or a reward that is called as carbon credit. Okay, and this carbon credit you can actually sell to a country, or you can say sell to another company. Okay, for example, think a country that is producing sandals. Okay, so that is actually emitting around 12 kgs. Okay, so you can actually sell to this particular company. So that is what the buying and the selling of the carbon credits that actually happens in a mechanism in what is called as carbon markets. Okay, so all the time you cannot actually pay high tariffs or taxes to the government. So what happens? You have to regularize it. So there is actually a phenomenon of carbon markets. According to the UN standards, that is the United Nations standards, one carbon credit is equal to 1 ton of carbon dioxide that has been removed, that has been reduced, or that has been successfully sequestered or stored. So this is actually the meaning of carbon market. Now let us get into the concept in order to get a better clarity. So what do you mean by carbon market? This is also nothing but putting a price on the carbon emissions by the trading systems, where the carbon credits or the allowances can be bought or sold. So carbon credit is nothing but it is your tradable permit. You can trade. Okay, so if you are emitting well below the cap that the regulatory body or the government has set, then what happens is that you can sell that to another company or the country which actually needs it. So 1 cc, the carbon credit, is equal to 1 ton of carbon dioxide removed, reduced or sequestered. And this concept was actually introduced or brought into light by the Kyoto Protocol of 1997. Very, very important. And these carbon market or the carbon credits actually operate on the principle of the cap and trade. Okay, what do you mean? There is a cap. Either abide by it. If you cannot abide by it, then you will have to buy the carbon credits. If you abide by it, then you sell it to another country. So this is what is the concept of carbon market. Now, there are different types of carbon markets, that is specifically two types. One is the compliance market. The next one is the voluntary market. The term itself says compliance means mandatory. So, mandatory markets regulated by the government or the intergovernmental bodies. Here, the entities are required to purchase the carbon credits to offset emissions. If your emissions are more, then you have to buy this particular carbon credits. Okay, this is what they are saying. Example, you have the emission trading system of the European Union. Also, you have the California's cap and trade program. Also, voluntary markets, what are they? They are either individuals or they are companies to voluntarily purchase the carbon credits in order to offset their emissions beyond the regulatory requirements. Okay, so this what to say, this voluntary market system has actually grown very significantly, okay, especially as businesses aim to meet their corporate social responsibility. Okay, so usually when there is some amount of emission by a company or a corporate, what happens is a part of the corporate social responsibility, they either, you know, contribute in afforestation, right? So they also contribute in other activities which are environmentally sustainable. So one of such is actually your voluntary markets also, where they get the carbon credits in order to offset the emissions that they have, what to say, they have emitted. Okay, and India is a major exporter in this particular market, contributing to 17% of the global supply in 2022. So these are the different types of carbon markets. Okay, so here you can see, very easy. This is the compliance market, focus here. And here, this is the voluntary market. What is the compliance market? First of all, this is your actual carbon dioxide emission. This is an industry A. Okay. So here is the cap that is actually set by your regulator or the government. So you are, you know, emitting this much only. So there are reduced emissions. So what you do, you sell your carbon credits in the carbon market, and they will be purchased by a company B, which actually gives out, or there are excess emissions over here by this much. Okay, so they will buy it. So this is how carbon market, that is compliance market, functions. If you see voluntary market, okay, so this is the cap that is actually set. Okay, so CO2 emissions reduced by, there's so much of CO2 which is reduced by the particular project. Okay, so they can also sell the CO2 or the carbon credits to the carbon market, and the CO2 emissions that you expect to reduce. So you want to reduce this much of carbon dioxide, those people can buy this particular carbon credit. So this is how the compliance and the voluntary markets in the carbon market specifically function. Now, let us move to the evolution of carbon market landscape. As I told you, the evolution actually first started in the Kyoto Protocol of 1997. Okay, the first major agreement, this established carbon markets and also came up with the principles of clean development mechanism. Very important. Okay, clean development mechanism, that is called as the CDM. Can you see here? CDM. They came up with the mechanism of CDM. This is nothing but the developed countries, those are called as the Annex 1 countries, okay, under Kyoto Protocol. When the developed countries, Annex 1 countries, invest in energy efficient, okay, or what, the carbon less infrastructure or the projects in the other developing countries which are non-Annex 1 countries. Okay, so this is called as the CDM, clean development mechanism, and they will actually earn the, what to say, emission reduction certificate on emission reduction. So they will earn the CER. Okay, whereas there is another concept called joint implementation. What do you mean by joint implementation? Here, the same developed countries, Annex 1, they actually invest in the projects or the environment friendly projects in another developed or the Annex 1 country. That is called as the joint implementation, and that results in ERUs, that is the emission reduction units. So do you understand? So first one, Kyoto Protocol, this actually introduced the concept of what? The carbon markets, and also created mechanisms of the CDM as well as what? The joint implementation. In CDMs, the person actually gets what? Certified emission reduction. So certified emission reduction is actually given over here, and in terms of joint implementation, Annex 1 invest in Annex 1, and then that results in the emission reduction units. Now the focus is on reducing the GHG reductions. Okay, all that is not much important. The next one came the what? European Union emission trading system. We already told now. So people will be paying taxes here even inside the European Union. That is why they do not come under CBAM, is what we discussed in the previous article, right? So this was a concept introduced in 2005 as the world's first major world's first as well as the biggest carbon market, okay, like the energy and heavy industry. Then finally came what? The Paris Agreement in 2015, where they emphasized on the role and importance of carbon markets, okay, how both the compliance as well as the voluntary markets actually have to be over here. This is what they said. And in order to achieve the NDCs, that is nationally determined contributions, let me tell you what are NDCs. In 2015, when the it was COP21, so 21st meeting of the UNFCCC, when the countries came together, they actually thought how important it is for us to regulate these carbon markets, etc., and also to curb the impacts of climate change. So they actually came up with something called nationally determined contributions, okay, so that is called as NDCs. Through this NDCs of 2015, the countries must actually come up with two plans. One is the short term goals, the next is the long term goals. The short term goals, the country actually have to come up once in every 5 years. So what are the measures it's going to take for the next 5 to 10 years is what it has to come up with in the short term goals. And there are long term goals also, okay. So in the short term goals, India also has actually committed, okay. So India has three short term goals as a part of its the INDC 2030. So what are the three? India actually aims to reduce its emission targets with respect to GDP by 45% from the 2005 levels. Very, very important. These numbers are very important. Second, 50% of the total electricity installed capacity actually has to come from non-fossil fuels by 2030. So this is the second one. And the third one is India actually has to expand or enhance its forest capability so that it can sequester or it can actually absorb around 2 to 3 billion tons of carbon dioxide. So these are the three NDCs that India has actually come up with. What? This carbon dioxide is annually, okay. So these are the three NDCs that India has actually told in the 2030. However, the 2035 NDC had to be submitted, but India will be delaying it because of the unsatisfied or the what to say, not so satisfied takeaway that India had actually had in the COP29, that we will discuss what were all the back seat that India actually had to face over there. So this is what is the NDC. Clear with the concept of NDC? Okay. And next one, Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, it established frameworks for international cooperation and other linkages among countries. These are all very common things. So you need to understand what do you mean by carbon market, what do you mean by carbon credit, and this particular carbon credit as a concept was introduced in Kyoto Protocol, very important. That came up with two mechanisms. One is the CDM. This is nothing but the clean development mechanisms, where Annex 1 developed invests in the developing, that is non-Annex 1 countries. Thereby they actually take the certified emission reductions, okay. They actually get those, they are awarded that. Whereas you have the joint implementation, where Annex 1 invests in Annex 1 countries developed in developed, so that they take away the emission reduction units, okay. And also this the next stage of this carbon market regulation of the landscape, it was actually highlighted in the European Union emission trading system introduced in 2005, and then it moved on to the Paris Agreement of 2015, where the countries realized how important it is. So it brought about the nationally determined contributions, and we saw India's commitment to, or India's NDC of 2030, okay. Now let us actually move forward to the next article, that is climate change adaptation. One thing you need to remember is adaptation is nothing but adjustment, okay. So whatever are going to be the impact or the ill effect of the climate change, on you. You have to adjust to it, or you need to employ or deploy some strategy or policies in order to adjust to the impact of climate change. This is, however, different from that of mitigation. Mitigation is altogether trying to prevent the menace of climate change itself. Okay, like for example, you are trying to use renewable energy. Okay, why? Because tomorrow there should not be any ill impact or ill effect of climate change. But this is a mitigation strategy, whereas adaptation strategy, the impact of climate change is already there. That is why you are using climate resilient food grains and other agricultural products. That is called as adaptation. Okay, so let us actually understand the concept. So India, I mean there was adopted, the countries have actually adopted the global goal on adaptation. However, what happens? There are significant gaps in the adaptation efforts. Okay, so what are these gaps is what we will understand. So before that, let us see what is climate change adaptation. Any kind of processes, or you have any strategies or the measures that the societies undertake in order to reduce the adverse impact of climate change is called, or adjust to its impact. First, remember this one only, don't think too much. So first, to reduce the adverse impact means already the impact has been created and you're just trying to adjust by reducing it. So how, or adjusting to it, this is called as adaptation. Whereas climate mitigation on the other hand includes methods like reducing the greenhouse gas emission. And adaptation is all about adjusting the social, the economic, as well as the environmental systems to manage the unavoidable effects of climate change. Okay, so the Paris Agreement has recognized the climate adaptation as well as mitigation as key components to the long-term global response in order to protect the people, the livelihood, as well as the ecosystems. Very, very important. Okay, so let us actually see here. You have, these are all the mitigation strategies, these are all the adaptation strategies. Okay, so you're using what? Renewable energy. Why? In order to reduce the what if you use coal and other things, okay, for the electrolysis process or for the other power plants or thermal power plants, etc., what happens? The emissions of carbon dioxide or the GHG is going to be more. If it is more, leads to global warming and impacts will be there. So you're trying to reduce the impact. So mitigation. And also you are following more efficient industrial practices, again in order to prevent the ill effects. So again mitigation. Eco-friendly transportation, you are actually moving on to electric vehicles, etc., EV that has actually come forward. So that again is mitigation. And also there is seasonal eating and less meat, because if there is more animals, more death, more decomposition, more methane emission. So these are all the mitigation. Whether if you see the adaptation, so already the impact is already there. Okay, so in order to be resilient towards the impact, what are you going to do? So air conditioning is what? We're already using air conditioner. Why? To beat the heat, right? I'm adapting myself to it. Okay, so if I have to mitigate it, what I should do? I should not use it, because it will release, or it will result in more consumption of hydrochlorofluorocarbons. Okay, so this is what it is. So more resilient agricultural practices. Then I am delimiting the coastal risk areas. Also I am taking important surveys, that is the entomological survey on the study of the insects, etc., and their impact. Next one, flood barriers in urban spaces, because now the flood will already, it will come anyways, but I have to protect my building, so I am building barriers over here. So this is mitigation, this is adaptation. However, there are few intersecting areas of mitigation and adaptation. For example, increase in urban green areas. So green areas, one, to prevent the global warming and to store the carbon dioxide. So that is mitigation. Adaptation, why? Already there has been huge impact. Even now, if I don't preserve it, it's going to be a problem. So adaptation and mitigation. Also awareness rising, and similarly water and energy saving. Okay. So this is also to prevent as well as to protect. So this is what it is. So now if we move on to the previous slide, we can easily understand the differences. Okay. So mitigation is nothing but efforts to reduce or prevent the emission of GHG. This is to adjust to the effects of the climate change and reduce the vulnerability. The objective is to address the cause of climate change, that is the GHG emissions, and here it is to manage the impacts and risk of climate change. Next one, the time frame, it is usually long term, right, mitigation, and this can be short or long term, okay, it depends upon whether, and it can also be local or regional. So examples, if you see, using renewable energy, industrial processes, eco-transportation, seasonal eating and less meat, all these are examples. Here resilient agriculture, flood barriers are the example. Common strategies are reduce fossil fuels, afforestation and increasing the green cover, energy efficiency and all those things. So both these are recognized in the Paris Agreement. So this is what is climate adaptation and mitigation. Okay. So we already saw that the world or the countries worldwide have actually adopted the global goal on adaptation. So what is this? These are set of objectives or the targets that actually guide and measure the progress and effectiveness of the climate adaptation, and here this was established in article 7.1 of the Paris Agreement. Very important, that recognizes adaptation. So global goal on adaptation recognized by the Paris Agreement as a key component of global response to climate change, and also it is seen as a unifying framework that can drive the political action and finance. So whatever is the political action, and when they come towards giving the climate finance, this will be very helpful. Okay, so this is what, and this has to be focused on the same scale as that of the mitigation processes as well. So this is what is the global goal on adaptation. So far, we've actually done with 4 topics. This is the 5th topic, that is EU nature restoration. Okay. So, the European Union countries, all the countries have actually given their approval or assent to the nature restoration plan of the European Union. Let's see what is that nature restoration plan. Of course, again, anything that the European Union comes up with respect to the emission reduction, the biodiversity conservation, climate change, etc., it forms a larger part of the European Green Deal. I told you, right? European Green Deal, it was approved by the European Commission in 2020 in order to make this climate neutral or carbon neutral. To make what? To make European Union carbon neutral by the year 2050. This is what it is. Okay. So, it is part of this, and this nature restoration aims to establish the plan. Okay. It aims to establish the world's most ambitious climate and biodiversity targets. Okay, some come up with such ambitious targets and make the European Union the global point of reference. So if anybody wants to know which is the best, block or the place that is actually which stands as a landmark in conservation of the biodiversity, then people have to look forward to European Union. The aim is to restore the degraded ecosystem and the habitats across EU, improve the biodiversity and climate change, because it talks about nature restoration, right? Implementation is that there will be national plans that will be created. So national restoration plans that will be created. So what are all the specific actions different countries will take, all that will be there, and the European Union together will provide the funding and the technical assistance. Okay. Now moving forward, there are few major principles in that. 1 minute, let me tell you. Yeah, the 3 major principles in this restoration. Sorry, not 3. There are few major principles in this restoration plan. The first one is climate. Okay. So becoming the first climate neutral continent by 2050 is its aim. Let me zoom it. It's not very visible here. So if we zoom it, you can see, right? Yeah, the first one is climate. So becoming the first climate neutral continent by 2050, of course, European Green Deal, right? 2020. And here it is fit for 55 package. Of course, the reduction in the emission targets by 55%, okay, in order to achieve this target by 2050. So this is what it is. Next one, focus on energy, where there has to be clean and efficient energy transition. So this is the second principle. The third one, focus on industry. So your industrial strategy should be such a way that it is competitive, it is green, and you make the entire Europe digital also. Okay, so this is what it is. This is also fit for 55 package, and this involves the batteries regulation, plastic strategy, or plastic management rules, waste management rules, etc. Next one, environment and oceans. Of course, you need to protect the biodiversity and the ecosystems. How that can be achieved? By the circular economy action plan. What do you mean by circular economy? RRR. Okay, so reduce, reuse, recycle. So by that strategy, then you have chemical strategy for sustainability, zero pollution action plan, etc. Next one is agriculture. So there has to be a healthy food system. So agriculture, transport and finance are the next ones. Okay, so one is agriculture. There has to be healthy food system for people and the planet. Okay, you would have heard about the farm to fork strategy. Starting from the farm, however is your agriculture productivity, what is the sustainable practices that you do in agriculture, whether you're giving a fair compensation to the farmers, whether you are improving their livelihoods and the income, from those strategy to the fork. Okay, how is actually your food security, how are you in managing the food, the exports, the buffer stocks, all that actually comes here. So farm to fork strategy and organic farming action plan. Here with respect to India, Sikkim becomes the first organic state. Next one, transportation. Here you provide efficient, safe and environmentally friendly transportation. These are very, very common, but one thing you need to understand, okay, let me tell you, finance and regional development should be there in accordance with the EU Green Deal, where sustainable investments have to be there. Okay, so here also corporate sustainability reporting directive, that is what the the CSR. So all this should be there. So basically, when they ask you as a part of European Green Deal, what are all the principles? Does it include finance? Yes, it includes finance and regional development. It includes transportation. It includes agriculture. It talks about not only, it does not only deal with the environment and oceans, energy, etc. It also has other sections like industries, energy also. So climate, energy, industry, environment, agriculture, transport as well as finance. So all these are important with respect to European Green Deal. Okay. Now let's move forward. Okay. Let's move forward and see what are all the key targets. Of course, restore at least 20% of the land and the sea areas by the year 2030. Next one, restore 30% of the specific habitats, whether it is forest, it's grasslands, etc., to good condition by 2030, and that will further increase to 60% by 2040, further increase to 90% by 2050. And you have to restore at least 30% of the peatlands by 2030. Okay, we have discussed about the peatlands, right? How it actually stores carbon, what are these marshy areas, and here we discussed about mire, we discussed about the bogs, we discussed about fens. These are the types and whether they are nutrient rich or what is the source of water, whether it is groundwater or runoff, or it is precipitation. All this we've discussed. Please do watch the first two videos and then come to the third one. Okay, and then increasing 50% by 2050. What is this? The drained peatlands. Okay, next one, plant addition of 3 billion trees and restore around 25,000 kilometers of rivers into free flowing rivers, and finally maintain or increase the green space in the urban areas as well as the tree cover. So these are the targets of the EU restoration plan. Next one, a very important and an interesting topic, that is climate engineering. So just let us look into the comment section as to what's happening here. Okay, come on. Now let's continue. What do you mean by climate engineering is what we will discuss over here. Okay, so climate engineering. So the ethics of climate engineering report. Ethics of climate engineering report. There is something very humane, a human touch is given here, right? That is, this basically talks about how to include the vulnerable as well as the most marginalized communities in decision making processes of climate engineering. Okay, so this is what we will see. First of all, climate engineering is also called as geoengineering. What do you mean by climate engineering? This means you are tweaking something, like just like genetic engineering, how you change the genes, right? So similarly, the climate engineering is manipulating the behavior of the earth systems in order to counteract the climate, okay, or the climate change or the effects of climate change. So this is what it is. So ethics of climate engineering report has been released by UNESCO. This has emphasized the importance of including the vulnerable as well as the marginalized sections or the individuals as the primary stakeholders in the decision making processes or the decisions of climate engineering. For that, let us quickly see what do you mean by climate engineering, also called as geoengineering. So this is nothing but a group or a number of technologies or techniques for intentionally manipulating the earth's climate system in order to counteract the effects of climate change. So for example, if I am carrying out afforestation or reforestation, let's say, so if I'm planting a lot of trees, what am I going to do? I am going to result in carbon sequestration, where my plants are going to take in the carbon dioxide during photosynthesis. Okay, so I'm going to reduce the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Or I can focus on growing the mangroves also. Yeah, this is the same thing only. Okay, or I can directly capture the carbon, use it somewhere and store it underground. So that can also be there. Or it can be other methods where I am actually tweaking or changing the reflectivity of the earth. Okay. For example, I am painting the surface as white. Okay, so when the surface is white, what happens? The albedo or the reflection is more of the incoming solar radiation. The surface actually reflects more of the incoming solar radiation, so that absorption of the solar radiation is very less. Thereby the surface temperature does not become hot. So that can also be an option. Or I can also inject aerosols into the stratosphere. Okay, so what happens, this is something similar to the volcanic eruptions. When the volcanic eruptions takes place, number of gases, aerosols, everything is released into the stratosphere, right? It reaches till the stratosphere. That what happens, the amount of reflectivity, that is the incident solar radiation that is coming inside, or insolation, is reflected back, so that the so this is what it is. What are the methods of this climate engineering? First, I told you, is carbon dioxide removal, where I remove the excess of carbon dioxide by natural or by the technological means, where the first one is afforestation. I told you, enhanced weathering process. Okay, so when there is crushed rock material, I can actually sorry, when there is crushed rock material, I can actually spread it across the land or in the ocean. In the ocean, when this rock material actually comes in contact with the moisture, there is some process called as weathering. Okay, when the weathering actually takes place, what happens? The minerals in this soil, they actually contract or they bind with the carbon dioxide, and they result in the formation of carbonates, okay, CO3. So this actually act as, what to say, they store the carbon for a very long time. So enhanced weathering. Then direct air capture, from the air itself I'll capture and store it underground. So this is also one method. The next one, it can be here. See, the one is the carbon dioxide removal method, afforestation, enhanced weathering by stretching, as well as direct air capture. Or it can be by solar radiation management. If you guys cannot see, let me just zoom it for you guys. Yeah, solar radiation management, where first stratospheric aerosol injection, where I put certain aerosol materials inside. Then marine cloud brightening, I am brightening the cloud, thereby the reflectivity is actually more. Next one, albedo modification, that's what I'm tweaking with the reflective nature, okay, whether it is the space or the other surfaces. Next one, space-based geoengineering. Next one is ocean albedo modification, okay, altering how much the oceans can actually reflect. So these are all the different techniques. Let's see the solar radiation management methods. It's easy only. This is nothing but stratospheric aerosol injection, I told, right? We actually spray the aerosols like the sulfate aerosols into the stratosphere. So this is similar to that of the volcanic eruptions, I told you. So after volcanic eruptions, there will be cooling effect and darkness also, because entire light is actually blocked. Okay. Next one, marine cloud brightening. This is where you actually add very tiny particles to the clouds over the ocean in order to make them more reflective, brighter. So this will actually reflect more sunlight. Next one, albedo modification, where the earth's reflectivity, by painting the surfaces white, you are, what to say, altering the reflectivity. Next, space based geoengineering, where you're putting a giant sunshade, okay, in the space to block the incoming sunlight before it reaches the earth. Next is ocean albedo modification. So here you are basically changing the properties of the ocean in order to make it more reflective. So what do? You actually add bubbles, and or you also manipulate the phytoplankton growth. If there is more phytoplankton growth, what happens? It actually takes in the carbon dioxide during photosynthesis, and hence it actually stores it. When it dies and sinks, it is submerged in the ocean bottom. Okay, so now next is also CCUS, very easy only. The Department of Science and Technology, this is preparing a roadmap in order to achieve India's net zero targets by 2070. India aims to achieve this. Okay, before that we have the SDGs also. Okay, SDG 13, climate action, SDG 15, terrestrial ecosystems, or the land. Okay, so life on land, which also includes not a, I mean it also includes desertification, etc. Okay, so how can this be controlled? By carbon capture, utilization and storage. From the name itself is there, right? So whenever the industries actually emit the what to say, harmful gases, the carbon alone is actually captured, it is utilized for some other processes, and it is stored rather than being released into the atmosphere. So this is what it is. Okay, so let's carry on. Okay, let us actually see what do you mean by CCUS. It stands for carbon capture, utilization and storage. This is the technology that is used to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions, particularly the carbon dioxide, by the industrial processes and power generation. So this is a process where you have three steps: carbon capture, then storage and utilization. If you see capture, you are capturing carbon dioxide from the other gases emitted by the industries. Next one, there are different techniques which you use here. Not important, but then you need to know chemical scrubbing, then membrane separation, and what to say, absorption used for capturing. Then you, whatever carbon is utilized, you are not going to, whatever carbon is captured, you're not going to release them directly. You will see if they will find any kind of application in any other industries. Okay, so it involves, utilization of carbon dioxide for various purposes. What are the purposes? One is even in the oil recovery. If you actually, induce the carbon dioxide into the oil wells, what happens? Earlier, even if you are not able to what is it, extract it out, this carbon dioxide inducing inside will actually pull up the oil, so it will increase the production of the oil. Next one, there will be creating of synthetic fuels. Okay, so when CO2 actually mixes with H2, what happens? There will be methanol, that is CH3, that will be produced over here. Okay, like methanol and gasoline. And also producing building materials, like carbon dioxide is actually used in curing concrete, etc., in the cement production. So carbon dioxide can be used. So the captured, first you capture carbon dioxide, you utilize it for different purposes like enhanced production of the oil, then creating the gasoline, that is the synthetic fuel, and then producing building materials. Now after all these purposes, you are going to store that underground, okay, in the geological formations. These can be coal seams, these can be depleted reservoirs of gas, etc., and the deep saline aquifers also can actually be there. Okay, so this is the process of CCUS. Okay, if you see here, this is capture, extracted from natural gas factories, plants. Then it is transported to storage sites via pipelines. Before that, it is stored. Okay, where is utilization here? It is given as a third, but this is the second one. Okay, so you leverage the remaining carbon dioxide into usable products like this, and finally you store it. You pump it underground into the rock formation where it is permanently stored over here, or enhanced oil recovery. This is also one of the process for utilization. Okay, so this is CCUS. So done. Now, most important topic of the session. So we just have three more topics. UNFCCC COP 29. So just let me have some water before that. Just give me a minute. वो वाला नीचे कर दीजिए तो क्या है हाँ ये वाला ये हाँ हाँ नहीं 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 उसको ड्रैग कीजिए नीचे इसको नीचे 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 ओके yeah. So yeah, now let us quickly do these topics in 15 to 20 minutes and wind up our session for the day. So UNFCCC 2000, sorry, where I just lost track of it. Yeah, COP 29, not 2000 and all. Fine. COP 29. This was recently held. That is Conference of Parties. You know that, right? UNFCCC, United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. So here you have the Conference of Parties, which is actually the decision making body, and these Conference of Parties meet annually. Okay, so it actually started from COP1, COP2, and if you see, COP3 was the Kyoto Protocol of 1997, and then you have the Paris Convention, that was COP21 and all those things. So similarly 22 happened, 23 happened, and now we are in COP29 that took place in Baku, Azerbaijan. Clear? Yes. Now, let's quickly see what this UNFCCC is all about. So, when there was a necessity for all these climate change and climate action, there were three Rio Conventions that were actually signed. What are these Rio Conventions? One is actually to combat the temperature or the emission targets, etc. That was United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. The next one was UNCCD, that is United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity. Then the next one was United Nations Convention to combat desertification. So these three are called as the Rio Conventions, okay, in order to combat climate change. So these three individual agreements are all legally binding. That means what? All the countries which are a part to this particular agreement should actually follow. For example, they have to meet every year through COP, that is Conference of Parties. So they will meet, and under Conference of Parties there will be different conventions that will actually be signed. There will be different emission targets that are set. That is also binding, but then what? The particular, how much of emission that a particular country should control is not something is binding. Do you understand? For example, specifically in COP29, there were huge discussions on the fact that 17% of the emissions actually come from agriculture. So can a country like India, where majority of the population is dependent on agriculture for their livelihood and sustenance, is there possible for us to not take up any more agricultural practices? At the same time, they found that around 29% of the methane that is emitted is by the livestock. Can we stop our farming and ranching? Okay, this is not possible, right? So according to the convenience and whatever is sustainable for a country, they will actually abide by it. Okay. So for example, if it is 20% reduction for America, it's going to be 5 to 10% for India. Okay. So this totally depends upon how I can run my country, because I am developing. Okay. I need technology for my development. I need infrastructure. For all this, it's not easy for me to just transcend to other sustainable options like renewable energy, etc. in the immediate future. So this is what is the UNFCCC. Okay. It is legally binding, but then as I told you, it does not set legally binding targets. Okay. It is not uniform for everyone. That is why they came up with the concept of common but differentiated responsibility, that is CBDR, where the historical polluters during their industrialization and revolution, like the developed countries, they have to pay more, and the developing countries should actually be paying less, is what they spoke about. And also they came up with the intended nationally determined contributions, that is the INDC, where every country actually have to come forward and give their targets for the next 5 to 10 years. Those are the short term goals, and then you also have to mention what are your long term goals. And also countries will come together and give you climate finance. Okay, here private, public, government and all the stakeholders from everywhere, the fund is actually pooled and it is actually given for controlling or curbing the menace of climate change. So this is the overall framework of UNFCCC. Now let's quickly jump into it. So UNFCCC adopted by the Rio Earth Summit. Again, if you're not able to see, let me just zoom it for you guys. Okay. So adopted by the Earth Summit, Rio de Janeiro, 1992. The objective was to stabilize the greenhouse gas concentrations in the atmosphere at a level that would prevent dangerous human interference with the climate change. Not important, just to curb the menace of climate change. The framework nature, legally binding treaty, but does not set the binding emission reduction targets. Understand? Please have clarity on this. Okay. Next one, 197 parties to this particular convention. India part of it or not? Yes, it is. It includes the EU also. EU, I told you, number of countries you need to know. Next, what are the principles? It brought about certain principles like CBDR, common but differentiated responsibilities, okay, and respective capabilities. Next one, precautionary approach to address climate change and the right to sustainable development goals, okay. Next one, the COP is the supreme decision making body, that is the conference of parties, which meets annually to assess the implementation and to adopt the decisions. And what are the key climate agreements here? It is the Kyoto Protocol, legally binding targets, and here it talks about what are all the emission targets that is actually set for the developing and the developed countries in order to reduce the GHG emissions. Next one is the Paris Agreement of 2015. It spoke about reducing or limiting the increasing global average temperature below 1.5 degree. Okay. So this is what it is, with efforts to limit to around 1.5 degree. Okay. So limit the global temperature rise to below 2, and you have to focus on limiting till 1.5. Then introduce nationally determined contribution. I told you what are three India's determined contribution with respect to the electricity installed capacity, reducing it. 50% of it should come from the non-fossil fuels, and then one actually focused on reducing the emissions from 2005 levels of the GDP by 45%, and the next one is 2 to 3 billion tons of carbon sequestration or absorption by the carbon sink. So these are all India's targets. Okay, so this is about the UNFCCC. Now there was this meeting in 20 exactly, if you want to know the date is not important, but still I shall actually tell you. COP 29. Yeah, again the date is not important. In 2024 is something that you need to remember. Okay, so yeah, let us actually move forward. So these are the key outcomes of COP 29. First one, they actually brought the NCQG. Okay, what do you mean by NCQG? This is nothing but new collective quantified goal. Okay, so this is the new climate finance goal. So triple climate finance, that is developing countries to USD 300 billion per year by 2035. This is nothing but the climate finance that was actually around $300 billion per year was expressed. Okay, but then they actually wanted, the developing countries wanted thrice around 1.3 or $1 trillion, let's say. So you have to triple the climate finance, especially for the developing countries, to USD 300 billion per year versus what you had actually already been giving, that is USD 100 billion. Okay, where developed countries taking the lead, and you have to scale up the climate finance to around 1.3 trillion annually. Okay, so already they were giving 100 billion. This was actually accepted, per year they will give 100 billion, but then what was the expectation? 1.3 trillion, but this was also not achieved. So what was achieved? $300 billion. So this is what was accepted. Next one, carbon markets agreement. We saw what are carbon markets, carbon credits, everything we saw, right? So it finalized two key mechanisms under Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. So what is it? With respect to carbon markets and carbon credits, two countries can get into bilateral relations or bilateral agreements between the countries to trade the carbon credits. The next one, 6.4. This actually created a centralized UN managed carbon market in order to offset the emissions. This was what? In order to enhance the global participation in the carbon markets, okay, and also to contribute towards the emission reduction. So one was the new collective quantified goal, that is the NCQG, where the developing countries were actually disappointed because only 300 billion was concluded over there, where they expected 1.3 trillion. Next one, carbon market agreement. There can be bilateral agreement between two countries, and also there has to be a UN regulated carbon market is what they said. What is the next conclusion they came up with? Declaration on reducing methane emissions. So 30 countries over here had actually signed, okay. So they actually signed the declaration targeting the methane emissions from organic waste, okay. And this is responsible for 20% of the global methane emissions. So here there was inclusion of methane emission targets. They said include the methane emission targets in your nationally determined contributions is what they said. So on what, what was the basis for building this up on? It was the global methane pledge. Here very important, India is not a part of, or it is not a signatory of the global methane pledge. Why? You know that, right? Most of our economy actually runs on agriculture, that is farming and ranching, where the people rear the livestock. So if you don't if you stop rearing, the economy will actually fail miserably. So that is why India is not a signatory. This is what was aimed by the global methane pledge in order to reduce the emissions by 30% by 2030. The next one, gender and climate change. There was a Lima work program on gender. So sometimes they can ask, Lima work program on gender is associated with which of the following? So this was extended for 10 years. So this was actually emphasizing on the gender equality. They called for the participation of both women as well as men. Okay. So new gender action plan will be adopted at COP30. Where is it going to be held? It will be held in Brazil, okay, to further integrate the gender responsive approaches in climate change. The next one is Baku Harmonia Climate Initiative for Farmers. This specifically was launched in partnership with the FAO, that is UN Specialized Agency, the Food and Agriculture Organization, that predominantly aimed at supporting the farmers by consolidating. So whatever are the existing initiatives with respect to food and agriculture, you consolidate and you actually bring about benefits to the farmers. And also there has to be an easier as well as more accessibility to the climate finance for sustainable agricultural practices is what is this Baku Harmonia Climate Initiative for Farmers. Also, there was this one, support for IPLC, that is indigenous people and local communities. Okay, so there was adoption of this Baku work plan under the local communities and indigenous people platform. Okay, this is what, in order to integrate the indigenous knowledge into whatever are the modern climatic strategies, include both the traditional knowledge plus your modern technology. Next one, enhance the participation of indigenous communities. Okay, so already there was an ethics report by UNESCO, right? UNESCO, right? Yeah, in order to include in climate engineering, you have to include the vulnerable sections of the population in order to do the climate engineering decisions. So similarly, include the indigenous communities also. Also, the facilitative working group of the LCIIP was renewed. Okay, so these are all the outcomes of COP29. However, there were certain discontent that India actually showed with respect to that of the emission targets, with respect to methane, we saw, right? Because us, we actually run on agriculture, and also we were not very satisfied with the climate finance, because we expected 1.3 trillion, but what was given to us was how much? Was around $300 billion only annually. So, what was the concern that was raised by India is that the common but differentiated responsibility was not met, because that was actually the basic principle of Paris Agreement, right? Historical polluters must actually pay. So, but then that was not followed. Here, the brunt was on the developing economies as well. So, that was one of the discontent it showed. And with respect to carbon markets, India raised concerns on a particular concept called junk carbon credits. Let's see what is junk carbon credits. Carbon credits are what? These are a mechanism where these carbon credits are permits, right? They are the eco permits where you can actually trade, you can sell or buy the carbon credits in order to offset your emissions, right? So there is a concept of junk carbon credits, which means it is carbon credits that do not represent genuine additional or permanent reductions in your GHG. Okay, so even without these credits, certain projects are viable, they will happen anyway. So using these, many countries are trying to escape is what India said. So these credits often arise from the projects that would have occurred even without the incentives from the carbon market. Next one, they overstate their emission reductions. Okay, they will say we will reduce it by 50%, but it will not happen. Do you understand? There will be inaccurate baselines or inaccurate calculations. So these are called as the junk carbon credits. And also the last one is they fail to deliver the long term benefits. Okay, because of the project collapse or the reversal of emissions. That is, they will say we have cut 100 trees. Okay, now we are going to plant 100 trees. Now after few years, you will see again they are going to expand the project and they are going to cut this back. So whatever emissions you said you are going to curb, you are again going to release. So India was not happy with this junk carbon credits. You need to be aware of this particular term. That is why I brought this. These are all concerns that India had with COP29. In case you want to read about that, we have covered that in an exclusive detailed article for the mains, and you can find this article in our Navigator monthly website, and you can download this Navigator monthly magazine from our Narayana Navigator website. Okay, so go to current affairs, under that you have the monthly current affairs, you can download it from there. Okay, now moving forward, we also have our yearly, and however we are actually taking up the yearly right now. Next one, the next one, ninth article is Global Cooling Pledge. So Global Cooling Pledge at COP29, UNFCCC, the Global Cooling Pledge was actually one of the focal points. So you can understand from this itself, right, what is the cooling pledge? This is actually aimed at reducing the GHG which are emitted by the cooling sector. That can either be your refrigeration or your air conditioning. And this particular pledge was actually launched in UNFCCC COP 28 in 2023 in Dubai, and this was developed by the Cool Coalition plus the UAE, okay, the host of COP 28. Let's see what is the Cool Coalition. Okay, so did you know that this Cool Coalition was initiated by United Nations Environment Program? Let's see. It is a global multi-stakeholder network, and this was initiated by the UNEP. Very, very important. Okay. UNEP. Next one. It aims to promote efficient climate-friendly cooling methods or technology or solutions worldwide. And this particular cooling coalition was launched during the first global conference on the synergies between the 2030 agenda as well as the Paris Agreement. And this actually has over 130 members, including the governments, it is actually the businesses as well as international organizations, CSO, that is the civil society organizations, etc. What are the key initiatives? Global Cooling Pledge is one of the key initiatives. Then Beating the Heat Handbook as well as the India Cold Chain Program. All these are the key initiatives of the Cool Coalition, who has over 130 members. Very, very important for the exam. Okay, so this is the cooling pledge. Now let us see what is it, what are the key targets. So this actually aims to achieve 68% of reduction in cooling related emissions, and there will be energy efficiency also by cooling technologies, that is 50%, improve it by 50% by 2030. And there has to be access to sustainable cooling solutions also, particularly to the vulnerable population. And it has been signed by 70 countries. Again, India not included. Okay. So even on that methane pledge, India not included. And again, this cooling pledge, India not included. Okay. Because we are still developing, right? And we need to have significant investments on our in our technology if we want to transcend to a sustainable cooling solutions. Okay. So this is why we haven't signed this. Okay. So this is the cooling pledge and the the key targets of emission reductions coming from cooling. Some of the important facts that we need to know is about CFCs. Okay, what is CFCs? It stands for chlorofluorocarbons. Okay, so these are used in the cooling appliances, and these were phased out in 1987 itself in the Montreal Protocol, because this was actually causing a lot of ozone depletion. That is why this was ruled out or phased out. However, eventually it got replaced by the HFCs. Okay, what do you mean by HFCs? This is hydrofluorocarbons. Okay, this also had what? It also had what? The high global warming potential. So here there was something called as the Kigali Agreement or the Kigali Amendment to the Montreal Protocol, and this took place in 2016. Okay, so here what happened? They plan to reduce the production and the consumption by 85% by 2047 of what? HCFCs, that is hydrochlorofluorocarbons. Okay, do you understand this? And this is very important, 85% by 2047, and the Indian government has ratified the Kigali Amendment, okay, in 2021. So Kigali Amendment is to what? It is to the Montreal Protocol. Very, very important. So this is what is the cooling pledge. The last topic for today is UNCCD. Okay, so the 16th conference of the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification. So this recently took place in Riyadh, that is Saudi Arabia. So let's quickly see what is UNCCD. If you can't see, this is also similar. Okay, so this was actually established in 1994. Okay, established in 1994. It is the sole legally binding international agreement which links environment and development to sustainable land management, that is SDG 15. Sustainable land management, land, or you can say life on land. Okay, next, to prevent and to reduce the land degradation is the target, specifically in the arid as well as the semi-arid and dry humid areas. Okay, and also it focuses on not a top-down approach but a bottom-up approach involving the local communities. Very, very important to combat desertification. And also it actually focuses on the restoration of the degraded land. Okay, and also works for food security. Members 197, India is also a part, European Union is also a part, UNFCCC also, European Union was a part. Conference of Parties, COP, is the supreme decision making body, and it does not meet every year, it meets biennially, once in 2 years, to review the implementation and to adopt the policies and the decisions. The flagship publications include the Land Outlook, we already saw this, and the World Drought, very, very important. And what are all the observations of the recent World Drought Atlas you need to know. Anyways, I will talk towards the end of this this topic. I have actually taken down what are the important observations of the World Drought Atlas 2024, and we'll discuss about that. The flagship initiatives, definitely we studied about the LDN, right? That is Land Degradation Neutrality 2015. This actually talks about you have to set voluntary targets in order to achieve the land degradation neutrality. Okay, and as a part of LDN only, India committed to restore 26 million hectares of land by 2030. Okay, next one, strategic framework. This was actually adopted in 2017 and operates between 2018 and 30, where it urges the countries to incorporate all the concerns of desertification. Now you can see here all desertification and drought, then implement national policies in order to combat the same. Next one, very, very important, the Changwon, South Korea. Okay, so the Republic of Korea. So the Changwon Initiative 2011, the Republic of Korea launched this during the COP 10 of UNCCD in order to support the global target of SDG 15.3. Okay. Next one, the Great Green Wall Initiative, very, very important. This actually is an initiative of 2007. Okay, this aimed at creating a green cover. That is why it is called as Green Wall, a green cover or the green belt across the Sahel region of Africa. So this is important in order to combat desertification as well as restore the degraded land. Okay, understood? Yeah. So now let us see if there has been any query that is actually asked for us, and then we will resume. Okay. So nothing so far. We will actually move forward and see further. What are all the takeaways of this meeting? This is very easy only. Here they have actually brought about a global drought resilience partnership. Okay, where there will be around $12.5 billion will be given to 80 vulnerable countries in order to make them resilient to drought and desertification. Next one, there is a global drought framework which was actually brought about. Okay, so this was aimed at finalizing at COP 17. This is COP 16, right? Right. The global drought framework will actually be finalized in the COP 17, which will actually take place in Mongolia. Next one, Green Wall Initiative, the Great Green Wall. We spoke about the green cover or the stretch or the green belt in the Sahel region of Africa. So much, that is 11 million euro was pledged by Italy for this, and 3.6 million euro was contributed by Austria under this particular initiative. Okay, then Business for Land Initiative. Here it encourages all your private companies to take up the sustainable business practices. Okay, and then the WF, that is the World Economic Forum, and UNCCD, that is the United Nations Convention on Climate Change, also introduced the LDN, you know, right? The Land Degradation Neutrality, the strategic intelligence map, which is designed in order to guide the businesses in evaluating what are all the risks and the opportunities that are related to the ecosystem. Now moving forward, you have the prototype of the International Drought Resilience Observatory. So this is actually the first ever AI driven platform in order to help the countries to see what is the drought resilience and what is actually the what is a type of drought or the desertification that will come in the future. Next one, the Rio Trio Initiative is a part of what? This actually brings together the UNFCCC, the Rio Conventions, right? The Rio Trio. So UNCCD, UNFCCC and the CBD. Then you have the science policy interface. This is nothing but it actually translates what are all the specific findings, okay, into actionable recommendations. Okay, so this was originally established at COP 11 of UNCCD at Namibia, and also next one including the indigenous people and the local communities representation. Okay, so these are the key outcomes. And further, the next one we have the vision for adapted crops and soils, that is the VAX. Before that, the Sacred Lands Declaration, this was also presented during the forum. Next one is the VAX, that is Vision for Adapted Crops and soils. So this is nothing but the United States and several other countries and organizations actually came together and announced the total investments of around $70 million in order to advance the adapted crops and soils vision. Okay, so this is nothing but it is a global movement which is put together by, you have the US Department, the FAO to boost the agriculture productivity, and next you have the African Union also, that come together in order to enhance and develop diverse as well as the climate resilient crop varieties. Okay, these are all the key outcomes of the UNCCD's COP 16. Now let us actually see a concept of regenerative agriculture. Okay, so we have to close up because we'll have to start with the DNA, but let's quickly do it. Key outcomes of COP 16 is regenerative agriculture, that is nothing but emphasis on restoring 150 million hectares of land for regenerative agriculture. This is nothing but it includes the farming and the ranching. Okay, so growing of the crops as well as the livestock. This will improve the health of the soil, the health of water and biodiversity. At the same time, it will mitigate the climate change also. And the principles of regenerative agriculture is what is mentioned here. Minimize the soil disturbance by using zero till or minimum till. Next one, plant the ground year round. Don't actually keep it empty because it will be subjected to erosion and desertification. Then crop diversification is important. The next one, precision application of biological and chemical outputs. That is, there has to be proper seeds, I mean, which has to be planted. There has to be proper irrigation that has to be given, all that, as well as crop nutrition. And the final one is integrate the livestock whenever possible. Okay, whether for the process of compost, whether for the process of tillage, for the process of inputs, all that you need to use. So this is what is regenerative agriculture. The last one is the concept of land degradation and desertification. This is nothing but the reduction of the productivity, that is, be it biological or the economic productivity of the land, specifically in the arid, the semi-arid, as well as the dry subhumid area. So this is because of various factors. Okay, and mainly is the anthropological factors or the human activities. It is a type of land degradation that occurs when fertile land is turning into a desert. So don't think UNCCD is just, it's a deserted land. Fertile land is converting because of human activity, specifically in the arid and the semi-arid areas. Okay, now moving forward, this is actually the current status of land degradation, and specifically according to the Land Degradation Atlas of India, you can actually it is published by Space Publication Center. Here Ahmedabad, the organization is located in Ahmedabad. Here you can see around 97.85 million hectares in 2018-19 and 29.77 of the total geographical area of the country. So degradation and desertification has happened in this much of land, and also around 25% of the land degradation is in the states like Rajasthan, Maharashtra, Jharkhand, Odisha, Telangana, etc. Okay, so this is by the processes of water erosion, then vegetation degradation and wind erosion. And globally also, if you see, you can see between 2015 and 2019, around 100 million hectares of land has actually been subjected, which is twice as big as Greenland. Okay, so this much of land degradation was there, and the most affected was the Eastern and the Central Asia, the Latin American and the Caribbean regions. Okay, where they have lost 20% of the total area. And finally, if you see sub-Saharan and Western Africa and all, they have experienced land degradation at a rate which is faster than the global average. If you could not see, let me zoom it. You can see according to desertification atlas. So you can see which is located. This is published by Space Application Center and India and I mean the Indian Space Research Organization Ahmedabad. You can see how much of million hectares of land has gone, 29% of the total geographical area, and these are the states that are affected and the total causes for that of this land degradation. And in the world, this is the these are all the most affected regions, okay, and whereas the other regions of America as well as the sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia are the most affected. So with this, we've actually come to the end of our third session of Environment and Ecology series of the Prelims Masterclass 2025. And tomorrow, we will actually continue with the climate change mitigation and adaptation. Followed by that, we will move on to our biodiversity topic. Okay. So I will actually meet you tomorrow in yet another live session. So thank you and have a great day.